losing a large part of the Catholic youth in Germany, he said, was not as great as the consequences to the Catholic Church in general in surrendering to the Nazis. So he warned the world when he spoke at Lisieux, Lourdes, Paris, and Budapest in the 1930s about the neo-paganism of the Nazis and the cross that is contrary to the cross of Christ. And he sent 55 notes of protest, up to 45 pages in length, to the Nazi regime, condemning their violation of the Concordat of 1933, which was the only legal means to preserve and protect the rights of the Catholic Church in Hitler's Reich. It was an agreement not with the Nazis, but with the nation of Germany, with the government, with the legally elected, unfortunately legally elected government of Germany. It was, by the way, not the first bilateral treaty offered to Germany's new and freely elected Nazi government, but followed the quadripartite agreement with France, England, and Italy of 7 June 1933 and was signed just a month before the Avara agreement with the Jewish Agency of 25 August 1933. Not surprisingly, Pacelli was instrumental in the launch of the papal encyclical Mit brennender Sorge, an uncompromising condemnation of the Nazi ideology in German language, the only encyclical ever issued in German language, for which he invited the most outspoken German anti-Nazi bishops to Rome, just to toughen their draft from with great sorrow to with burning sorrow, for example, and many other examples. He also arranged for the condemnation of the basics of the racist Nazi ideology extracted from a review of Hitler's Mein Kampf by the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, be sent to all Catholic educational institutions in 1938, the year of the introduction of racial laws in Italy, after Hitler's visit to Rome. On this occasion, by the way, Pope Pius XI and Secretary of State Pacelli withdrew to Castel Gandolfo, quote, due to the foul air in Rome. They ordered all Roman prelates to stay away from receptions for the Nazi leader and closed the Vatican Museum just in case the art-loving Führer would suddenly decide to visit them. Quote, on the feast of the exaltation of the cross, a cross which is not the cross of Christ as exposed in Rome, Pius XI told newlywed couples at an audience in Castel Gandolfo on May 3, 1938. And on September 6, 1938, with an audience of pilgrims from Belgium, he stated, spiritually, we are all Semites. So the anti-Semitic laws go against all of us. So what happened after Kristallnacht, which was the overture to the Holocaust, the pogrom night of November 9, 1938? When the synagogues of Germany were burned, Pacelli realized that the time for wars was over. It was time to act. Just 3 weeks later, on November 30, 1938, he sent a circular to all nunciatures ordering the papal diplomats to ask hospitals and universities for opportunities to employ Jewish academics from Germany and Italy. Exactly 2 months later, after the Kristallnacht, on January 9, 1939, when the busy Christmas season was over, he sent another circular, this time to all Catholic archbishops of potential immigration countries, 51 at least, asking them to do everything possible to obtain visas from their governments to facilitate the immediate immigration of 200,000 German non-Aryans and to offer them in their new destination, quote, religious buildings and schools so that they can continue to follow their religious Jewish traditions. Clearly, he did not refer to converts to Catholicism, but instead to Jews, at a time when 233 racial Jews still lived in Germany, but about only 20,000 converts who were affected by the racial laws. So the number clearly indicates he wanted to evacuate nearly all German Jews. Although the Holy See was willing to finance the mass immigration and asked for donations, this impressive project failed due to the lack of cooperation from the states. Brazil promised 3,000 visas, but issued only 1,000. Argentina and Chile offered 1,000 each. Only the Dominican dictator Trujillo was more generous, issuing up to 800 visas every half a year, when the nuncio personally was required to request them in the name of Pope Pius XII. My last point is, why no more open protests? In his speech to the College of Cardinals on June 2, 1943, Pius XII stated, quote, "Every word that we addressed to the responsible authorities and every one of our public declarations had to be seriously weighted and considered in the interest of the persecuted themselves, in order not to make their situation unwittingly even more difficult and unbearable." On November 7, 1944, the British ambassador, Arthur Osborne, directly suggested that the Pope not to speak out on behalf of the Hungarian Jews, since he would also have to condemn the war crimes of the Russians and feared serious political repercussions. Instead of the alleged silence, we can rather observe a reduced public outcry in form of three documented public protests in 1941, 1942, and 1943, for several good reasons. Pius XII knew from experience during the time of the Armenian genocide that papal protests might not save a single life, but instead might increase the speed of the deportations and massacres. When Radio Vatican reported on Nazi atrocities against the Catholic Polish population, the Polish bishops asked the Pope to stop these reports, fearing further repercussions by the Nazis. In 1942, Pius XII wrote a pastoral letter of encouragement to the Polish Catholics and sent copies for distribution to Adam Sapieha, the Archbishop of Krakow. Sapieha did not disseminate the letter, but instead burned it, telling the papal delegate that it would just serve the Nazis as a pretext for a more severe persecution of the Polish Church. When the Nazis deported the Jews of the Netherlands, Dutch Archbishop de Jong protested in a pastoral letter. As a result, the Nazis accelerated the arrest of the Dutch Jews and started to arrest all converted Jews first. They then deported them to Auschwitz. Those experiences taught Pius XII to be careful, ad maiora mala vitanda, what means to avoid a greater evil, as he wrote to Berlin Archbishop Konrad von Preysing in 1943. Indeed, the inmates of the Dachau concentration camp, about 2,800 Catholic priests among them, feared any outside protest on their behalf, especially from the Vatican, since the guards made them feel their anger, as Jean Bernard, a priest from Luxembourg, remembered in his memoirs. 1/3 of the Catholic priests of Poland were exterminated. Adolf Hitler himself stated in 1939 that any support, quote, from foreign countries is granted to those especially who want to destroy the Reich. We will consider it just a compelling cause to toughen our measures, unquote. Instead, Pius XII tried everything to shorten the war by collaboration with a conspiracy of German high-ranking officers to overthrow and kill Hitler, as we have heard, and by granting American Catholic soldiers his nihil obstat to fight side by side with the communist Russians against Hitler, whom he considered the greater evil. At the same time, he often enough delayed or even stopped deportations of Jews by more than 40 documented diplomatic interventions, both unsuccessful in Hitler's Germany and often successful in its vassal states such as Mussolini's Italy, Vichy France, Slovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary. As you can see in my full report, which is available on my homepage, you find it in the program. Apart from this, from September 1943 until June 1944, Pius XII was a virtual hostage of Hitler. The Germans had occupied Rome, German paratroopers controlled the Vatican borders, and Hitler had given orders to SS General Karl Wolff to invade the Vatican, arrest the Pope, and bring him to Germany, or even to kill him in case that he protests against the Holocaust. So the German aggression, the German threat was quite remarkable. Documents indicate that the plan was to stage a clash between SS men dressed as Italian partisans, occupy the Vatican, to kill priests and bishops where encountered. The German Wehrmacht would then liberate the Pope, in quotation marks, anticipating Pius XII might openly move to protest the Holocaust. Robert Kempner, United States representative at the Nuremberg trials, stated that any propaganda attempt by the Catholic Church against Hitler's Reich would not only be provoked suicide, but would have caused the killing of an even higher number of Jews and priests. Gerhard Riegner, Secretary General of the Jewish World Congress, stated that any public protest would have just increased the speed of killing. Harold Tittman, U.S. representative at the Holy See, was convinced that the Pope, quote, saved many lives by not speaking out. He went on, who can say what the Nazis would have done in their ruthless furor had they been further inflamed by public denunciations coming from the Holy See? In addition, as we have heard before, the Pope's contacts with the German military resistance required him to act prudently, since he was needed as a neutral intermediator. Any action of the Vatican would have made the German Catholics come under even more scrutiny than they already were, and would have greatly restricted their freedom of action in their work of resistance to the Nazis, which included hiding thousands of Jews or smuggling them out of Germany. So instead of a more outspoken public protest, a provocation which, with the risk of an escalation, Pius XII decided to concentrate his energy on two aims: to get rid of Hitler, either by a coup d'etat or an Allied victory. As I said, he allowed US Catholic soldiers to fight with Stalin's Red Army, and to save as many Jews as possible by helping them to leave Europe in the beginning, or at least stopping or delaying their deportation into the Nazi death camps. He did not have another choice, because this was the way to avoid greater evil, ad maiora mala vitanda. Thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Dr. Hesemann, thank you for your presentation and also describing to us the personal background of Cardinal Pacelli, his deep contacts with the Jewish community, the work he did, his opposition to Nazism, and also placing his quote-unquote silence in a greater perspective. Our next speaker is Professor Matteo Napolitano, who is Professor of the History of International Relations at the University of Molise in Italy. He is the author of many essays on the diplomatic work of the Church during the Holocaust, and in particular, Pius XII and John XXIII. He will speak to us about how diplomacy was used to try to save mankind and share with us the rescue networks set up to rescue Jews in Europe. Professor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to be here. And my purpose is to talk about the humanitarian diplomacy and about the role of the Vatican in this field. To this day, my topic will be the following: Pius XII and the rescue networks in Europe, the test case of Jews rescue in Hungary, the anti-Jewish Nazi roundup in Rome of 16 October 1943. As to the rescue question, I discovered that in Italy, some archival collections have meaningful titles. For instance, you see here, forms to counterfeit documents issued by the fascist Italian Social Republic, the so-called Repubblica di Salò. In fact, some archival collections show that many people connected to ecclesiastical institutions were very creative in the art of counterfeiting. Look, for instance, at these stamp and seal proofs. Everything was false. Nazi fake documents were produced thanks to people with capabilities in counterfeiting. People closely connected, as we know now, to the Catholic Church and the Vatican. Documents show that bishops and priests were in the middle of similar operations aimed at saving people from arrest and deportation. In the Italian case, in this Italian case I mentioned, the front runner of the operation of rescue was a Milan-based Catholic Boy Scout organization known under the name of Aquile Randage, Stray Eagles. This organization was coordinated by Father Barbareschi, a Milanese priest who was in direct contact with Milan's Cardinal Schuster and with Monsignor Montini. These people helped the church to issue false documents for Jews and for people who were wanted by the Nazi fascists for whatsoever reason. The importance of rebuilding memories and events after the Shoah was felt by many Jewish communities soon after the war. This operation involved also the so-called Days of Gratitude, organized by the Italian Jewish communities 10 years after the end of the war, in order to commemorate non-Jewish benefactors who helped Jews during the war. Through this aim, it was decided to start an operation of documents retrieval about the cases of help given to Jewish people by non-Jewish people. To save by telling lies, to save by the art of forgiving. This is a brand new, fascinating story we should consider as an integral part of church history during the Second World War. In this field, researchers face a series of problems. In general, we should keep in mind 3 problems. The problem of retrieving documents soon after the Second World War has been a difficult one because of a lack of records and testimonies on the Shoah. The complexity of the game, and third, the fact that the rescue network worked on a multi-level and multiplayer path. These considered new documents led us to the conclusion that the question regards not only Pope's involvement, but also various organizations as religious orders, dioceses, parishes, and other Catholic groups, many of them heavily engaged in the Italian resistance movement. Another remark is necessary. Documents inform us that various non-Catholic organizations, a number of them Jewish organizations, were keeping close contacts with the Vatican, at the same time operating for their own aims. Another important point is the following. In the Italian case, the division between northern fascist Italy and southern Italian kingdom makes no sense when it comes to rescue networks. A report by Italian Major Antonio Bertone of 6 June 1944 is a test case to this purpose. Bertone informed his superiors that 315 patriots and Jews were set free from roundups and that 8 people had been saved by forged orders of release from Regina Coeli, the Milan prison, while other 73 prisoners were assisted and hidden. Please note, Antonio Bertone was a trooper under the orders of the fascist Italian Social Republic, and he was in close contact with his counterpart in the Regno del Sud, southern Italy, by sharing the same fight against German occupation in Italy. Furthermore, Major Antonio Bertone was awarded of the title of Righteous Among the Nations by the Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. In a nutshell, documents give new evidence of the fact that the division of Italy into two parts after 8 September 1943 did not prevent people engaged in rescue networks to cross the borders among the two Italies. In fact, the network involved both Italies along their borderline, Parma to Rome, Fiume to Campania, Fiume to Rome, Milan to the Vatican, and so on. The archives of the Center for Jewish History keep Howard Heinz Wiesler's diary, Long Journey Home, describing his bizarre trip through 20 countries. In Rome, Wiesler, whose audience with Pope Pius XII is largely known, experimented the Vatican hospitality during his Roman stay, the danger of deportation notwithstanding. When in need of a visa to Spain, this man, to whom Pius XII recommended to be proud to be a Jew, found help thanks to the direct intervention of the Pope. This episode is a part of our wider rescue daily work of the Vatican and its partners. Hungary is another test case to ascertain how the rescue machine worked. We gave already many information on this topic in our book, Budapest Righteous. Here we want to give few other examples of Vatican position regarding the tragic fate of Hungarian Jews. In Prime Minister Carlyle's notes on its audience with Pius XII of 3 April 1943, retrieved in the Carlyle's papers kept in the Hungarian National Archives in Budapest, we see clearly that the Pope was deeply disappointed by the German policy against the Jews and the Church in the occupied territories. This behavior, the Pope underlined, was not only an interference in the affairs of the Church, but was in opposition to the principles of a Christian world based upon the Word of God. Another evidence of the Vatican position in Hungary comes from a diplomatic note the Apostolic Nuncio in Budapest, Monsignor Rotta, sent to the Hungarian Prime Minister on 15 May 1944. The simple fact, begin quote, the simple fact of persecuting men only for their racial birth is a violation of a natural law, end quote. Another crucial evidence of the division between the Vatican and Philo-Nazi Hungary comes from the records of a dramatic meeting between the Apostolic Nuncio in Budapest and the Arrow Cross government on October 21st, 1944. This document is in the personal files of Monsignor Gerardo Verolino, who was the Uditore di Nunziatura, hence the number 2 of the Nunciature after Monsignor Rotta. The main theme of the meeting was the way the Arrow Cross government was treating the Hungarian Jews. Monsignor Rotta spoke frankly, Hungarian acts will not be accompanied by God's blessing. Zalasi replied to Rotta that it was better not to pronounce God's name in this discussion. I love too much religion to mix up God's name in such a question, he said, end quote. But the question, as I said before, was the way the pro-Nazi Arrow Crosses were treating the Hungarian Jews. Being necessary to face such a situation, the Apostolic Nunciature in Budapest acted quickly. Several thousand letters of protection signed by Monsignor Rotta were prepared as blank forms to be filled by inserting the personal data of those people in need of a Vatican protection and or sanctuary. Hence, the role of Vatican diplomacy in Budapest was pivotal in the wider rescue network in Hungary, In fact, if we consider the Budapest network at a glance, we see that the Apostolic Nunciature in Budapest had a leading role in saving Jewish lives. It is not useless to remark that the Nunciature, 3 main diplomats, were awarded with the title of righteous among the nations, Monsignor Rota, Monsignor Verolino, and Father Baranski. But the list of the Vatican connections in Budapest, even with other righteous, is much longer. But this is only a part of a story, since further consideration should be added. Not long ago, many initiatives were devoted to describe the operation Visas for Life, involving many foreign diplomats in Budapest belonging to neutral countries. This operation is described in detail by Monsignor Verolino personal files. Apart from Verolino and Rota, the operation Visas for Life involved people like Per Anger, Swedish legation, Tibor Baranski, Apostolic Nunciature, again, Karl Lutz, Swiss legation, Herkel Slevik, Polish diplomat and activist, Giorgio Perlasca, Spanish legation, and Raoul Wallenberg, as we know very well. But even in this case, the list could be longer. As to the Nazi anti-Jewish roundup in Rome on 16 October 1943, this is a very delicate question, as we know, because it involves the secular relationship between the Jews and the popes on one hand, and between the Roman Jews and Roman Gentiles on the other. The Vatican archives keep a very important document on the case, Cardinal Maglione's handwritten notes of a conversation with German ambassador to the Vatican, von Weizsäcker, on the very early morning of the 16th October 1943. What did Maglione say to the ambassador? Quote, "For the Holy Father, it is a torment that under the common God many people are left in suffering uniquely for they belonging to a certain race." End quote. On his part, von Weizsäcker noted the orders of deportation came from Berlin, namely from Hitler, and asked what should the Holy See do were things supposed to be continued. Maglione replied, quote, "The Holy See doesn't want to be put in the need to express its own disapproval. The Holy See must not be put in a necessity of protesting. Should the Holy See be forced to do that, it should trust in the providence for the consequences." In order to avoid a diplomatic crisis, which meant another diplomatic failure after his removal from his former leading post in Berlin, von Weizsäcker asked not to report to Hitler the conversation he had with Cardinal Maglione. Maglione let him free not to do that, provided the roundup was put to an end immediately. This point is very important. The danger of a diplomatic crisis and of an eventual Vatican protest was never reported to Hitler because Ambassador von Weizsäcker asked Maglione to keep himself silent about it. That's the reason why German archives do not give any evidence of an eventual papal protest against the roundup in Rome. In compensation, von Weizsäcker kept his word to call for an end of the Nazi roundup at Vatican's request. Even the Roman case gives evidence of an existing rescue network in which the Holy See was fully engaged. I quote a note by Cardinal Karl Sidor, who was a Slovak ambassador to the Holy See. Under orders of the Holy Father in the Jesuits' General Curia, more than 100 people among Jews and Italian officers were hidden. The same way in every monastery, Jews are hidden with their whole families. Holy Father is providing them food. Money and food are coming from the Vatican. It is a very important news. That's the way the Vatican is behaving toward the Jews. Coming back to the question of an eventual papal protest against the Nazi roundup in Rome, it's interesting what the British minister to the Vatican, Osborne, wrote on 30th October 1943, the same date of Sidor diary entry. Osborne informed the Foreign Office that as soon as he knew about the arrests of Jews in Rome, Cardinal Secretary of State sent and expressed a protest, a quote, a protest, end quote. Hence, the ambassador acted quickly to the effect that, quote, the majority of those Jews was set free. Thus, Vatican intervention seemed to have been effective in saving a number of these unfortunate persons. Hence, in our opinion, a close connection exists between the Nazi